Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana, and as always, it's great joy for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. I see some of you filing in to join us for this evening's class, so welcome, and thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for raising your hand if you can hear me. Please validate that I am speaking. Yes, thank you very much. Eveline, nice to see you. Jess, nice to see you. All right, thank you very much. You can all put your hands down and we will proceed with a little bit of housekeeping, as is our usual program. So for those of you who are new to the satsang, your audio and viewing options can be changed according to the controls you have in the upper right-hand corner. You don't need to worry about your mic or video camera. If you would like to be heard, so to speak, you can pop something into the chat box, and I will keep my eyes out for any questions or comments that you may have. And with that, quick summary of what we did last time. We finished up chapter 16, the yoga of differentiating between the divine and demonic natures. We spoke about the three gates to hell: lust, anger, and greed. The authority of spiritual literature is where we left off, and that is where we're going to pick up as we move into this 17th chapter. We'll begin by comparing deference to scripture to personal truth. And we'll talk about the relationship of faith and the three qualities of material nature. We're only going to cover the first 3 verses of chapter 17 this evening, because that, I think, will be enough to keep us busy. And welcome to those of you who are just now joining us. Very nice to see you here. We will begin, or rather we will, before we begin to speak about our verses this evening, we will chant our invocation mantra. So for those of you who are new to transliterated Sanskrit, Sanskrit rendered in the Roman alphabet, a dot over an M indicates closing one's lips as well as closing the back of one's tongue to the back of the roof of one's mouth. Therefore, a dot over an M or an N takes on a more nasally sound. A bar over a vowel indicates an elongated, open version of that vowel, in this case, A's. So ah instead of And with that, I will chant our invocation mantra, and if you like, you can chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Our translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence, the son of Vasudeva being Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita. So last week, we concluded with verse 24 of the 16th chapter, which says, "Therefore, let scripture be your evidence in determining what you should do and what you should not do. Knowing such scriptural injunctions, you should engage with the world accordingly." So, an interesting proposition that not just the wisdom of scripture, but the injunctions of scripture, that is to say, the regulations. The word used here in this verse, the Sanskrit word shastra vidhana and uktam. So vidhanoktam, put those two words together, the regulations as declared in Shastra, scripture. And the word pramanam means evidence, once again reflects back onto Shastram, the scriptures. So scriptural evidence as our guide in order to decide how we're going to move in the world. That is to say, we are guided by scripture in the manner in which we engage in moral decision-making. So we defined scripture as knowledge about the supreme goal of life and the means of attaining that goal. So scripture is one of several elements in the yogic method of understanding what is true, pramana. In the yogic theory of knowledge, pramana has three parts. We find in the Yoga Sutras, direct perception is one, pratyaksha, logic, anumana is another, and verbal testimony. In the Yoga Sutras, the words agama is used. Another word is paroksha. And this verbal testimony is further divided into three categories: guru, one's teacher; shastra, scripture; and sadhu, exemplary practitioners. So we hear from a teacher, and rather than just blindly accept what they have to say, we have a system of checks and balances. We look to yoga wisdom texts. Did they say the same thing? We look to sadhus, people whose lives have been exemplary and who provide us with examples to follow. And they act according to these teachings and accept these teachings as well. If you have all three, then you know you've got a legitimate instruction. Then, does the instruction make sense? That is to say, you hear from scripture, but does it make sense? And then when you act on it, do you get the result? In other words, is it scientific? Can you replicate it? Here, what's interesting is that Krishna is elevating Shastra above sadhu, above guru, above direct perception, and above logic. So this brings us to a question. That question being, is it logical to defer to scripture as the ultimate authority on the supreme goal of life and the means of attaining that goal? I have this quote from Bishop John Shelby Spong. He's a retired bishop of the Episcopal Church. And this is from his book, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism. He's a very modern thinker when it comes to Christian theology. And he puts forth the proposition that what the mind cannot believe, the heart can never finally adore. In other words, as far as he's concerned, it would seem, scripture has to make sense. It can't just be literalism without some verification from logic and experience. So I'm going to just put that question out there. Is it logical to accept scripture as our primary evidence for what is true, and therefore as a guide for how we should act? I don't plan on answering this question this evening. If you have some thoughts on it, of course, I would be very happy to read those thoughts in the chat. We're going to stay with this question as we move through the chapter and explore this question a little more deeply over the course of our time together in this chapter. And with that, we will look at this week's verses from chapter 17, verses 1 through 3. I will read the translations, then we will go back and look at each verse individually and get a little deeper into the significance of each verse. So, with that, chapter 17, verse 1 begins with Arjuna asking a question. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what is the position of those whose worship is endowed with faith, but who do not follow the authoritative principles of Scripture? Are they in goodness, in passion, or in ignorance?" Text number 2. Krishna replies, "The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, 3 kinds of faith arise in an embodied soul according to their state of being, the state of goodness, the state of passion, or the state of ignorance. Now, hear from me about this." And verse 3. "Everyone's faith manifests according to where one places one's heart. A person is made of their faith. One is what one's faith is." Now let's go back and look at these verses in some more detail. This first verse of the 17th chapter is one that we are going to chant together, if you like. I will explain a little bit more about transliterated Sanskrit. A C is always a CH sound, as in ka. So you're going to curl your tongue back to the middle of the roof of your mouth and make that CH sound, ka. An accent mark over an S is an SH sound, but it's a deep SH sound from back by the hinge of one's jaw. So again, you're curling your tongue way back, as opposed to an SH sound that we would normally make in English, which is right behind our teeth. Shh. So this one will be a lower pitched SH sound. A dot under an R, also bringing your tongue curled back towards the center back portion of the roof of your mouth. So that can be a little tricky, especially when an R is followed by a J. So that'll be a fun bit of pronunciation there. You pronounce every letter that we see in transliterated Sanskrit. So if you see 2 Ds together, then you would hit the first D, slam on the brakes, and proceed from the second D. A dot under an H, the end of a word at the end of a line, indicates that a short version of the vowel that precedes the H will be echoed back. So whether the vowel behind the H is short or long, it'll always be a short version of that vowel. A dot under an S is a regular SH sound, as I indicated before, sh, right behind your teeth. A dot over an M, we looked at earlier. A dot under a T, a T without a dot is going to be a regular T right behind your teeth, ta. But a dot under a T now indicates, once again, you're going to curl your tongue up into the center of the roof of your mouth, so it sounds a little different. A regular T without a dot would be t or ta, and with the dot is ka. So it's like the sound kind of comes out the bottom of your jaw. as opposed to straight out of your mouth. A dot under an N is also pronounced with the tip of one's tongue up into the center of one's mouth, the roof of one's mouth. And there you go. I think I've got them all. I hope I have. We'll find out. I'll chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Here we go. Arjuna uvacha. Ye shastra vidhim utsrijya. Yajante shraddhayanvitaha. Tesham nishtha tu ka Krishna. Sattvam aho rajastamaha. The translation once again. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what is the position of those whose worship is endowed with faith, but who do not follow the authoritative principles of Scripture? Are they in goodness, in passion, or in ignorance?" So let's begin to look at this from the standpoint of faith. Arjuna does a lot with this question, and the first thing he does is he qualifies the question or qualifies the hypothetical person that he is speaking about as one who is endowed with faith. In earlier classes, we have spoken about how faith is the mandatory prerequisite for knowledge. So this gives Arjuna a good reason to question this. If one has faith, which is the prerequisite for knowledge, but one does not have knowledge of principles of Scripture, then what quality of material nature are they influenced by? So we've got a couple of things going on. The idea of different kinds of faith in one's own way of understanding the world without reference to Scripture, which in modern parlance we call a personal truth, as opposed to faith in knowledge provided by Scripture, which we assume to be absolute in nature, as opposed to a relative personal truth. We're talking about an absolute transcendent truth. And Arjuna asks this question within the context of the three qualities of material nature. In other words, there's an assumption here. And the assumption is that a person who is engaged in worship based on conviction without reference to the transcendental knowledge of the Scriptures is operating under the influence of the three qualities of material nature, and he wants to know which one or combination there are. So at the end of the 16th chapter, Krishna proposes that one who fails to follow scriptural injunctions and instead follows their own impulses, the impulses of the mind and senses, such a person will never achieve perfection, happiness, or freedom from the perpetual cycle of birth and death in the material world. In other words, those who opt for personal truth over scriptural injunction are not going to qualify for the kind of spiritual knowledge that is liberating or elevating to the position of transcendence. So now it's important to make a distinction. When we look back at the commentaries, the traditional commentaries from the 4 different theistic lines of disciplic succession, or the lineages, where we find commentaries on the Bhagavad-gita, we find that there's a distinction between those who have scriptural knowledge but consciously disregard it. Heard it, but for one reason or another decide not to act on it. Either they don't accept it, or they just don't, it doesn't do it for them. And then those who are just not conversant with or even necessarily aware of scriptural knowledge. That is to say, someone who simply has not heard the Vedic wisdom or wisdom from some other tradition of spiritual knowledge. The commentators say that Arjuna is really referring to someone who is not aware of the scripture. That is to say, someone who you could say is innocent, just haven't heard it, just is unknown to them. Back in September, class number 79, we were in chapter 14, and we looked at a few different verses that are relevant to this verse, verse 1. So the last line has these 3 qualities of material nature in Sanskrit: sattvam, goodness; rajas, passion; and tama, or ignorance or darkness. So these 3 qualities of material nature are spoken about in detail in chapter 14. That is what the chapter is about. We find in the 5th verse of the 14th chapter these same 3 words: sattvam, rajas, tama, rendered a little bit differently according to where they appear or how they're constructed in the sentence, but the same 3 words: sattvam, rajas, tama, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the translation of this verse: goodness, passion, and ignorance are the 3 qualities that arise from material nature and bind the eternal living being to material embodiment. Then in the subsequent verses, Krishna explains a little bit about each one as follows. In the 6th verse, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating and gives freedom from difficulties. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. The mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings, and because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to fruitive actions. O son of Bharat, Arjuna, know that the mode of darkness, born of ignorance, is the delusion of all embodied living entities. The results of this mode are madness, indolence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. So from this, we can understand that someone who is under the influence of the mode of goodness is going to have faith that matches up with that mode. That is to say, their faith will be purer than the others. Krishna says that this mode of being is purer than the others. It is an approach to faith that gives freedom, happiness, and knowledge. Therefore, one will have faith in things that are associated with those qualities. Someone who's influenced by the mode of passion is going to have faith in fruitive activities, that they'll become happy if they work very hard and attain the objects of their desire. That's where they place their faith. Someone who is under the influence of the mode of ignorance, their faith will be delusional. They'll have faith in things that someone in the other, influenced by the other two modes, would think, that's nuts. That's never going to work. That's illusion. So just reviewing these qualities of material nature. Tamaguna, material quality of ignorance at the bottom. We work our way up to Rajaguna, the mode of passion, and then further to Sattvaguna, the quality of goodness. So ignorance, characterized by insanity, apathy, laziness, results in illusion, foolishness, violence towards others, the degradation of consciousness. Passion, born of hankering, is characterized by a distortion of the intelligence, intense endeavor, attachment to the results of one's actions. It results in greed, anxiety, misery, and stalled spiritual progress. Goodness, which is pure and illuminating, is characterized by clarity of thought, detachment from material acquisition, and results in the elevation of consciousness. So what else is significant in this verse is the phrase Shastra Vidhim. So Shastra Vidhim means the regulations or directives of Scripture. So one who does not follow such directives, is it possible to attain real knowledge and reach the ultimate goal of spiritual life by faith expressed through actions based on something other than the regulative principles of Scripture? Can you do it by speculative interpretation or imaginative creation? This is a topic worthy of our discussion because the need is felt by thoughtful people to reimagine religion, reimagine spiritual life, to think differently about how we understand Scripture itself. Scriptural literalism is usually associated with a kind of fundamentalism that, when you look at it, tends to interpret Scripture, even though it's meant to be literal. That is to say, someone may claim to be giving a literal interpretation of Scripture. But what happens is you choose those elements of Scripture that reflect the characteristics of a God you've made in your own image, that reflects the values of your own tribe. And therefore you end up with something that puts you and your tribe in opposition to someone else's tribe. And the God that you've created in your own image is always, of course, on your side and validates your position, your point of view. And this immediately takes us away from any sense of universal principles of religion, which we have spoken about consistently throughout this series, that is to say, Dharma, which is the overriding theme, the overarching theme of the Bhagavad-gita. What is the ultimate Dharma, the ultimate principle of religion that applies in all places, at all times, for all people, and not just for one tribe, or something that validates set of social values for one particular group of people. Once again, comments and questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat box. Meanwhile, back in the 4th chapter, Krishna spoke about one who endowed with faith. This is now the 39th verse from the 4th chapter, so a good reference looking back. One who endowed with faith dedicates themselves to the pursuit of transcendental knowledge, which is to say, knowledge that transcends all terrestrial, tribal inventions of religion, and subdues their senses for the sake of wisdom, is eligible to attain it. Upon acquiring such wisdom, one quickly attains supreme peace. Now let's contrast this with what we just read back in chapter 16, text 23, one who disregards scriptural injunctions and acts according to their own selfish desires attains neither perfection nor happiness nor the supreme destination. So if our interpretation of scriptural stories or scriptural injunctions is bent according to our own selfish desires, what to speak of if we simply concoct our own conception of spirituality based on our own selfish desires? What we get is actually the root of all evil rather than something that leads to goodness. Because unsatisfied selfish desires lead to anger, gratified selfish desires lead to greed. The two of them lead to illusion, which is to say that this will make you happy. And illusion leads to loss of discernment. You can no longer distinguish spirit from matter, good from bad, right from wrong. This loss of discernment leads to a misidentification of the self, the spiritual self, as the material body. And we think, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm American, I'm from some other country, etc. This material identification leads to pride, and that all adds up to envy. So Arjuna has asked that about faith that is not based on deference to scripture in terms of the qualities of material nature. And Krishna is going to respond now by providing some details about how different modes of nature are associated with different forms of faith. So revisiting this, the second verse, Krishna replies, 3 kinds of faith arise in an embodied soul according to their state of being: the state of goodness, the state of passion, or the state of ignorance. Now hear from me about this. So this is good to know in that, for one thing, it validates the response of echoing the question back to someone who asked it. Krishna validates the very idea that is the underlying premise of Arjuna's question, which is that one is going to be influenced by a different, one of these or some combination of these qualities of material nature if one is engaged in faith that is not based in scriptural direction. So Krishna says, yes, that's exactly how it is. According to their previous activities in a different quality of material nature, you get a faith that corresponds to those qualities. So if one is acting in the mode of goodness, then one is going to have faith associated with that mode. Mode of passion, something associated with that mode, etc. And this is due to the fact that this is our condition. This is where we're coming from. Each of us is influenced by a combination of these material modes of nature. Hence, we identify with what we appear to be, and what we appear to be is actually a combination of these qualities of material nature, as previously instructed by Krishna. Identifying with the false ego, we think we are the doer of activities that are actually being carried out by these three qualities of material nature. Now, here's the thing. This mentality of identifying with some combination of the modes of material nature, they can change. It will change because we evolve over time in relationship to the three qualities of material nature, the qualities of material nature that were influenced by change according to our karma over time. But we can also transcend the whole thing. So here's an exercise in svadhyaya, or self-study, study of the true nature of the self. Ask yourself, what do I have faith in? And this is something that, you can take a note now and then do this exercise later. Actually do this. What do I have faith in? And then the follow-up question to that is, what qualities of material nature do I feel influenced by? And then compare the nature of your faith with the qualities of material nature that you identify with. Or turn it around. Ask first, what qualities of material nature do I feel influenced by? Then ask yourself, what do I have faith in? And see, how is your faith associated with the qualities of material nature that you feel the influence of? And then finally, ask yourself, is my faith based on my own personal truth, the way I understand the world on my own, without reference to any kind of scriptural authority or wisdom text that I accept as presenting me with a basis for understanding the world? Or am I looking to understand how what I hear from a wisdom text is true, and how it applies to my life, and how I can apply it in my life? So there's your homework. Please let me know if you have any questions or thoughts about that. Meanwhile, we will chant 2 verses this evening. So this will be the, oh, well, thank you. Always nice to hear your note of approval. All right, so we'll chant this verse as well. Once again, we'll pronounce each letter that we see. So if we see 2 T's together, then we will hit the first T, slam on the brakes, and then jump off from the second T. Let's see, same thing with D's. An H after a consonant, you're going to put some air after that consonant. And we've got plenty of those. An apostrophe before a word indicates that a vowel has been dropped, and the vowel at the end of the word that precedes it is just going to be joined onto that word. And this is a rule of phonetic combination to make sure you end up with the right number of syllables. A C is always a CH sound. And when you get an H after a C, then you put some air after this CH sound. So it's like a double H. And I think I described everything else. So Here we go. I'll chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Sattvanurupa sarvasya Shraddha bhavati bharata Shraddha mayoyam purusho yo yat shraddha sa eva saha. We have a festival of H's in this verse. The translation, once again, everyone's faith manifests according to where one places one's heart. A person is made of their faith. One is what one's faith is. It reminds me of the scene from Taxi Driver. You are what you do. You become what you do. We are defined by our faith. So here Krishna is speaking about how, wherever we place our heart, so this is one definition of Shraddha, where one places one's heart. It is commonly translated as faith. So we're defined by our faith as determined by the qualities of material nature that influence us. So if I have faith in myself as an authority, then what mode of nature is my faith born in, according to Bhagavad-gita? A reasonable question to ask oneself when we consider what kind of faith we have. Does this align with an honest self-assessment? When we think about the kind of person that we are, how does that manifest as faith? Or, once again, reverse it. How does our faith manifest in action? How do we act in the world? How do we move through the world? How do we relate to other people? Who we associate with is a reflection of the type of faith we have, or the type of faith we want to have. We can aspire to a greater degree of faith or a different kind of faith that we feel drawn towards. Well, if we want to get that level of faith or quality of faith, you hang out with people who have that level or quality of faith, and that's how you get it. Faith itself is understood to originate in the quality of goodness. So to the degree that faith is situated in or oriented toward the quality of goodness, to that extent your faith comes to fruition. Now this is a really interesting idea. In the Yoga Sutras, Sutra Pada 2, Sutra 36, Patanjali explains the results of each of the yamas and niyamas. That is to say, when you practice the ethical directives and personal observances of yoga, you get a result from each one that he lists. And satya, truthfulness, is related to sattva, or goodness, the same root, sat, meaning existence or eternality. The Gita has already told us that learned sages define what is true in terms of whether or not it's eternal. If it's eternal, it's understood to be true. If it's temporary, then not as true. Relative truth versus an absolute truth. So in this sutra, Patanjali says, when one is established in truthfulness, or satya, one ensures the fruition of actions, which is to say that when one is situated in goodness, then one's faith comes to fruition. So there's where these two things are kind of side by side. Every living being is understood, as we heard in the 15th chapter, to be a fragmental part of the Supreme Person, of the ultimate, absolute, complete, absolute truth. But not just a part. The phrase that my Param Guru uses is part and parcel, indicating that we have an infinitesimal sample of the qualities of the Supreme Person, hence our inherent eternality and our inherent truthfulness. When we forget this relationship, that's when we come in contact with material nature and our knowledge gets covered, and we tend to develop different kinds of faith according to these qualities of material nature. So here's another good question to ask yourself. How has my faith changed over time? I said earlier that our relationship with the qualities of material nature changed because the shape, the combination of qualities of material nature that affect us change over time. It evolves over time. We often say, you know, I've grown as a person. Well, what's grown is the qualities of material nature that we identify with. Remember, there's pure consciousness, or the Purusha, the person proper. Then there are the qualities of material nature that we are associated with. And so there's two different kinds of growth. There's a kind of growth where we are evolving through the qualities of material nature. So sometimes, hopefully, going up towards Sattva Gun, maybe our evolution is not always in a vertical trajectory. Sometimes we may move horizontally into a different combination of the modes of material nature. Or we may drift downwards. We may lose our faith. And therefore, our connection to transcendence is also lost. But our natural condition is one of transcendental consciousness, or Shuddha Sattva. And ultimately, what we are hoping to do is move back to recover our true nature, which is to say, our natural position situated in transcendental consciousness beyond the qualities of material nature altogether. So coming back to our verse, the word sattvanurupa is actually a compound word consisting of sattva and anurupa. So sattva, goodness or existence. Anurupa indicates the particular shape of one's mentality. So according to the existence of your mental characteristics, then you get Shraddha Bhavati. One's faith becomes a certain way. And then Shraddhamayo, Maya means full of, so you become full or inundated with a particular kind of faith, and that is what you become. Faith naturally arises from whatever state of mind we have. And that faith is established according to the position of the heart in contact with a particular combination of these qualities of material nature. So, again, whatever qualities of material nature you're influenced by, your faith is going to correspond to that. So this is an interesting way to think about faith, in that we've been talking about faith from the standpoint of the different gunas, or different qualities of material nature. And therefore, there are different kinds of faith in the world, which in groups manifest as different religions. So rather than just looking from a historical perspective or from a sociological perspective, we can also look at the varieties of faith, or different types of faith forms, different kinds of worship, in terms of these qualities of material nature. We just celebrated Christmas yesterday. Today is the 26th of December. And so many different varieties of Christianity all separated this holiday, but it had different significance. Whether you're a Southern Baptist or a Missionary Baptist or a United Methodist or a Greek Orthodox. Well, Greek Orthodox, I think, actually celebrated on a different day. But if you're Roman Catholic, or you're a Mormon, or you're a Presbyterian or a Mennonite, these are all different manifestations of way of relating to Christianity. And you can look at all of them according to, well, what qualities of material nature are emphasized here? What combination of the qualities of material nature will make one a Seventh-day Adventist as opposed to a Jehovah's Witness? So you can think about it that way. Similarly, different qualities of material nature will manifest if one's religion is different altogether. So at this same exact time, we have the celebration of Hanukkah is, I believe, still in progress, and Kwanzaa just started today. And we can look at these different faith forms in terms of these qualities of material nature as well. So this is one of the reasons why I think that this lens of the three qualities of material nature that we have circled back to after looking at them in the 14th chapter is really one of the underappreciated elements of traditional yoga wisdom texts, because it's a remarkable and illuminating lens to look at the world through. And so I encourage you now to, first of all, look at your own form of faith and check it out through this lens, and then look at the varieties of religious expressions in the world and see what is revealed about them when you look at them through these different qualities of material nature. Which I believe brings us to the end of tonight's class. We covered a comparison of deference to scripture to personal truth, and we spoke extensively about faith and the three qualities of material nature. As we move deeper into the chapter, then Krishna will get even more specific about how different kinds of faith manifest from these different qualities of material nature. And with that, I would be very happy to take any questions that you may have, or hear any comments on this perspective that you might like to share. My thanks to those of you who joined us while our regularly scheduled program was already in progress, and for giving me some encouragement along the way. If you are watching this after the fact and you have any questions, please write to me, hari@hari-kirtana.com. I'm always very, very happy to hear from you. We also have a Facebook group that if you would like to post something on, I would be very happy to see that there, and I will respond. Hopefully others will engage in the conversation as well. Next week, we will continue with chapter 17, the yoga of threefold divisions of faith. We will speak about sacrifice in the modes of passion and ignorance, and how we are what we eat. We will cover verses 4 through 9. And that, as they say, is that. Annie, nice to see you. Lots to think about. You're very welcome. If I've given you something to think about, then I'll consider the effort a success. So thank you very much for that encouraging response. Last call for questions. And assuming that there are none, I don't see any. Okay, good. I look forward to questions and comments later. Thank you all very, very much for joining me this evening, or whenever you happen to be watching and listening. It's always a blast for me to be here with you, and always a great honor to have you here with me. And I will try to not rub my knuckles on the table and make that obnoxious sound through the microphone. All right. Good night, Tulsi Priya. Thanks for dropping in, and good night to all of you. I look forward to seeing you all next time.